I felt from the beginning that there was something terribly wrong with this war on cancer, but I didn't know what it was, and I'm still, to this day, still discovering aspects of this that are quite surprising and quite unlike what other people think. Patients have to begin to question this system. My interest in complementary medicine is based on my belief that many treatments have been neglected because of economic reasons, not just because of medical reasons.
Hi, and welcome back to Proven, Healing Breakthroughs Backed by Science. I'm Nick Palizzi, and in the next episode, we're going to be covering perhaps the most dreaded disease of our time, responsible for millions of deaths each year, and possibly the most obvious example of how modern medicine alone is not the answer to all of our health problems. I'm talking about cancer, and it's something that affects every single one of us. Whether we ourselves experience it or a friend or family member, it's now statistically safe to say that we all know or have known someone who has received this dire diagnosis. The numbers don't lie. 1 in 2 women and 1 in 3 men in the developed world will be diagnosed with some form of cancer in their lifetime. Just think about that for a second. Picture you and 2 friends or siblings. One of you is likely to. You don't need me to complete the sentence. Now, conventional medicine tells us that there are very limited options for the treatment of cancer. But when we dive into the realms of complementary and alternative healing that are covered in this series, we begin to see a much different picture developing. Now, conventional medicine tells us that there are very limited options for the treatment of cancer. But when we dive into the realms of complementary and alternative healing that are covered in this series, we begin to see a much different picture developing. I'm very sensitive to this topic, not only because I too have been affected by this disease in my family, but because there's a lot of information out there, and some of it has very little evidence. We're aware of how precious each day and week is for those who are working to heal themselves of this disease. So with that said, tonight we'll be doubling down on the core promise of the Proven series. As in all other episodes you've watched so far, we're only championing the healing methods that have withstood the vigors of extensive research and are known to be effective. And to be clear, some of these are adjunctive therapies, meaning that they work best when added to other modern methods. I know it can be tough for some of us to accept the use of modern drugs and surgeries. There's a tendency to pick sides when we start learning about all the remarkable alternatives that are out there. But the world isn't black and white. It's not yes and no. And sometimes, if we're looking strictly at what will give you the highest chance of survival, we have to take the middle road. In this case, an integrative approach that combines mainstream with alternative medicine is often the most effective way to go, as you're about to see.
Medical treatment of cancer evolved in layers, and they interact with each other, but basically there is chemotherapy, targeted therapy, immunotherapy, and another category less used, but definitely there, is metabolic therapy. 90% of the effort, the pipeline at this point, is targeted drugs and immunotherapy drugs, and about 10% is chemotherapy. So in a sense, intellectually speaking, chemotherapy is a dead duck. It's used, it's still the most widely used treatment. It also, most of the chemo is out of patent, and so there's not that much economic reason either to have it, and the public hates it, basically. You use it because you have to, but it's very unpopular. Mostly when we talk about where oncology is as a research topic and as a profession, most of the interest and attention is addressed to targeted drugs and then immunodrugs, and those overlap. What I found in writing Cancer Incorporated was that the targeted drugs, which is the government's main thrust, so-called precision medicine or precision oncology, is surprisingly ineffective. It turns out that there are to generalize, there are just too many mutations involved in cancer. You might have 40 mutations in a cancer. You can't give 40 drugs to a person. One of these drugs can have very serious side effect consequences. You give 2 of them, you're really in a dangerous territory. And so you're really in a quandary because there's a few cancers that appear to respond well to this kind of approach, like Gleevec. You do get quite a big improvement and we can see it in the survival figures for certain kinds of leukemia using that drug. But most cancers have multiple mutations in them. The benefit of doing chemotherapy or targeted therapy or modern drugs in general in stage 4 cancer has been estimated at less than 4 months. It's something like 3.7 months. This is not me saying it. This is an article that was in JAMA Oncology just a short while ago. And it also corresponds exactly to what James Allison said in his Nobel Prize acceptance speech in 2018, where he said that in general, you give a drug for advanced cancer, and if you move the needle over by 3 or 4 months, you're lucky. That's about what you're looking at. So this is a house built on sand. Plus, the cost of these new drugs is phenomenal, beyond anything ever seen before in the history of the world. It takes between $680 million to over $2 billion on average to develop a new drug. But we've got hundreds of mutations that need addressing. Who's going to pay for this? And then you've got 1.7 or 8 million new cases of cancer every year. You're going to use this targeted approach on each of them. Well, the cost of these drugs is $150,000 per patient, running up to $475,000. And as Leonard Saltz at Memorial Sloan Kettering said, that's parts, not labor. In other words, just to administer the drug, to give the drug, is more like we're talking about $1 million per person for one drug or 2 drugs. We have wonderful results coming out of the clinical trials for melanoma using immunotherapy, but the cost per patient is like $1 million to administer just two of these drugs. And the side effect rate is about 60%. 60% have immune-related adverse events, which are side effects. That means, in many cases, hospitalization for those patients. And if they are hospitalized, a quarter of them will die from the side effects of the drugs, not the disease. The truth of the matter is that many of these drugs don't really work. And this is the important point to understand. They're put into clinical trials, and then the clinical trials are paid for by the drug company. The drug company usually writes up the results, and we're told, and the FDA is told, this is an effective drug. We've tested this, and the drug improves survival. Well, what do they mean by survival? There's 12 definitions of survival in an NCI Cancer Dictionary. What they usually mean by survival is progression-free survival, PFS. That's a measurement of the time between the time that you begin treating and the time that the tumor starts growing again. But that doesn't mean anything vis-a-vis the patients. If you want a so-called patient-centric measure, yes, they may have had this progression-free survival interval, but they were sick most of the time that they were taking that drug, and then they all died at the same time. The layperson is unable to distinguish between progression-free survival and the real survival, which is median overall survival. That's the real patient benefit for the patients in the aggregate. They actually lived longer. But you have to also add the phrase with good quality of life. So I think we have to look very carefully, and what you're going to find when you look into this, and this is not just me saying so, but this has been looked at by a lot of very good scholars. And basically, it's really interesting. You can look at the FDA approvals over the past few years and the European Medicine Agency approvals, EMA, the European equivalent of FDA. 1/3 of the drugs actually have an advantage in terms of overall survival. The drug companies pushed for, and continue to push, for quick approval of their drugs based upon surrogate markers, meaning progression-free survival and tumor shrinkages. These are not reliable measures of whether or not the person is going to benefit from the drugs. Benefit comes from improvements in overall survival, the actual time that the person lives, start after the beginning of treatment, and improvement or maintenance of good quality of life. That's the so-called patient-centric measures. That's what the patient community as a whole should be demanding. I have a list of 16 or 17 recommendations for what to do about this problem. And one of those is to abandon the use of progression-free survival, go back to the old standard, which is improvement in overall survival. This will greatly diminish the apparent success of the FDA in approving drugs, but I don't feel that the goal and purpose of the FDA should be to foster the pharmaceutical industry. You know, we see this throughout government, that the agency capture, that the agency starts out to regulate the industry that it's being put in charge of. But instead what happens is, over time, they get too cozy with each other. And finally, you get the revolving door, the famous revolving door at FDA, where half the employees practically of FDA then go on and get a job as a lobbyist for the very company that they were supposedly regulating at FDA. By the way, their salary doubles when they do that. It literally doubles by just making the jump to the dark side, as they call it. So the whole culture has to change in order to correct these things. But I foresee a future, I hope for, a future in which we'll have fewer drugs, probably, but drugs that actually work. Well, I only want drugs that actually will improve the actual survival and the quality of life of the patients. I think the rest of it is dross, and it's just there to boost the stock of the 9 drug companies that basically own the cancer market. The payment of money, cash in hand, cash in pocket from the drug companies to individual oncologists who are performing the clinical trials. I mean, most people have no idea that this is going on. And do you know there is a government website, Open Data, that lists to the penny how much money individual American doctors are getting from individual drug companies. Now, I don't mean research money, which you could make a case for, okay? I think, a person could still have clean hands if their institution is getting money to do the trial, because nowadays, how else are you going to do it? I mean, this is a sad state of affairs, but that's the reality. But they don't have to take money to put their kid through college. They don't have to take money for the yacht and the second or third house. There's no imperative for them to do that. That's pure greed. And by the way, not everybody takes the money, because there are honest players out there too, and I'm thrilled to see this. One person whom I have high regard for, who invented some of these immunotherapy drugs, his take over a year was $260, which included a $23 meal from Pfizer. That's what the balance sheet of a true scientist looks like. So you've had this incredible systemic corruption of the field of oncology, and these are the people doing the clinical trials, putting their name on these studies at least, and by just a few well-chosen words and maybe some words from other, let me call them what they are, shills for the drug company, you've got a blockbuster. A blockbuster is a drug that sells over $1 billion in sales, and the public is just the hapless victim of this scam that's going on.
I once heard a doctor say that the wording and delivery of a cancer diagnosis itself can be a death sentence. Seems far-fetched when you first hear that, right? But what if, when we look at the biochemical effects of stress and trauma on the body, they might be right? We know that throwing ourselves into a sympathetic fight-or-flight state for extended periods of time can and will wreak havoc on our bodies, disrupting gut and immune function and often causing other serious illnesses. With that said, do you think mindset might be an important piece of the puzzle when we're trying to stack the healing odds in our favor? Well, the science is in, and you're right. In this next segment, we're going to explore some techniques that can be a true game changer when it comes to recalibrating your mind so that it works for you, rallying together and supporting all of the vital processes that are involved in healing any illness, including cancer.
Hypnosis is sort of the inbuilt mind-body modality par excellence. We can use hypnosis to help somebody feel less depressed, less anxious, less pessimistic, and we can help somebody use hypnosis to have less nausea during chemotherapy. So we can tackle mind and body symptoms with various strategies hypnotically in ways that simply cannot be done in a medical setting where that person is just showing up for their cancer treatment. And so in a paper I wrote about this recently, I actually was thinking about what are some of the ways that we can help people who are undergoing cancer treatment. And I thought, the help for that starts way before they start having the treatment. It starts at the first visit where they go for a routine screening at the doctor's office, whether it's a mammogram or something, and the doctor says, we want to get another look at this. And in that moment, that person's anxiety is, of course, totally mobilized. And so let's say they go back in and then they have another test or another something, but they have to wait for the results. So between the time when they do the test and they're awaiting the diagnostic results, they're in a fight or flight response, perhaps catastrophic feeling is, oh no, what's going to happen to me if this is malignant, and what about my children and my family and my job and everything. So the whole body's in a state of heightened devastation emotionally. And with hypnosis, we can address those emotional states right at the very, very beginning, right even before the biopsy results come back. We can help people emotionally stabilize themselves, reach a state of remembered homeostasis, like we can have them visit times in the future when they have accomplished something that they want to accomplish. We can have them visit times in the past when they felt a certain way, maybe a wonderful time when they felt triumphant about something that they accomplished, or a time when they felt very peaceful or very loved or very satisfied, and we can revisit those times hypnotically. We call them resource states. And we can actually do what we call anchoring them in the body. We can create cues that can re-elicit those states. So for somebody who is in a heightened state of panic and upset that they might have a cancer diagnosis, we can help them stabilize emotionally and recover some of their resources into the present. And then as they go along, and let's say they have the bad news that it is a malignancy and that they have to have a surgery, and so then we have a surgery date that's set up to remove whatever the tumor is. And so then there's anxiety about the procedure itself, all the kinds of anxieties that people have about undergoing a surgical procedure, not to mention a surgical procedure for cancer. So we have a whole bunch of strategies that we can use that I've written about and worked with to help prepare people to go through whatever that surgery may be comfortably, easily. We have studies that show that people recover from hypnotically prepared surgery. They recover more quickly, to recover their functioning. Before you can get out of the hospital, you have to pee, you have to poo, you have to eat, right? And we can help people hypnotically accomplish those milestones, have shorter hospital stays, be more comfortable when they recover from anesthesia. So we can tackle that whole interventional process. Or let's say they have more scans coming up. They have MRIs and CAT scans, and they're anxious about that. We can use hypnosis to modulate the procedural anxiety that they're going to undergo. So let's say as they move along the continuum, they find out the cancer, maybe they had a surgery removed, and the doctor says, well, I'm really afraid it's such and such stage, and we're going to do immunotherapy, we're going to do chemotherapy. And immediately they're going to go into their thought, oh my God, I'm going to be sick to my stomach, I'm going to lose my hair. Well, there are many clinical studies, and this is an area where there have been randomized control and trials of using hypnosis to moderate chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting. So we can actually help people tolerate the medications that they're going to be given. They can learn some tools to feel much more empowered, much less victimized by this nightmare of anticipation of what's going to happen at that next scan or that next visit. So we can help them in that way. But let's say the worst case scenario, they have a bad prognosis and they're basically told that they need to get their affairs in order. And so that's that final phase of life, and we can work with people hypnotically in that final phase of life to moderate excruciating pain that they may be feeling. The track record of hypnosis for moderating pain is been quite demonstrated. So absolutely, we have many strategies for moderating pain hypnotically that can be used to help people refocus somatically and psychologically vis-a-vis pain, and actually, lower it with perhaps fewer opioids or whatever. And then we can help them emotionally and maybe even spiritually, depending on where their belief system is, in making sense of their life. We can do that work in a hypnotically augmented way. They can go in and they can both review and make sense of and find the meaning at certain times of their life and make those very vivid. And we can help prepare them to remain comfortable, even in hospice care, to remain physiological comfort, which isn't available without using some of those strategies. And so in all phases of the cancer journey, it's possible to use hypnosis in multimodal ways to help every step of the way with that process. It would be a remarkable thing to be able to offer people. It's not integrated into our current healthcare model, but it's really something that would be of such value and benefit to some people. Not everybody's receptive to any of these things, but for some people it could really be life-changing through that kind of a course.
One of the biggest areas of research in yoga is for the treatment of cancer patients. Now, the goal or the aim or the claim is not that yoga cures cancer. Nobody's going to make that claim. The virtue of yoga for cancer patients is that it can treat many of the factors that cancer patients have to deal with. This is a life-threatening disease. Talk about chronic stress. That's where you're going to get your chronic stress. You're going to get your mood disturbance, your depression, your anxiety. Yoga can help with that. Yoga can also help with the actual side effects of the treatment for cancer patients. So the chemo brain from the chemotherapy, the fatigue, the nausea. There's studies that show that yoga can improve that. It's a potentially life-threatening disease. You're talking now about life perspective, life purpose and meaning. If yoga can improve your sense of life purpose and meaning and allow you to cope with this life-threatening disease more effectively as well. You don't want to give them more drugs. They're already under drugs. They're already dealing with radiotherapy and all the other side effects. You want to give them something behavioral, and yoga really addresses this in a long-term way. So that's what these studies are for. And there's actually a few studies which take a step further and have shown that in some patients, in some studies, immune function has improved in cancer patients. So talk about something that's going to really affect their prospective outcome. You want to improve immune function. So, and of course, there's this whole field of psychoneuroimmunology. We know that chronic stress actually impairs immune function. So when people get a diagnosis of cancer, the first thing that happens, boom, is that they're under chronic stress. Their immune function starts to degrade because of that negative impact of stress. And yoga can help them in the opposite direction and promote their quality of life. A lot of publications on yoga in cancer patients. And many hospitals now routinely offering yoga for their cancer patients as a consequence. So it's highly recognized as something that's beneficial for cancer patients and cancer survivors.
As we mentioned in the introduction to this episode, many of the practices that are being brought forward are intended to complement other cancer treatments, including conventional approaches. One of the most challenging aspects of many modern treatments to cancer is the long list of painful and disruptive side effects. Everything from loss of appetite to intense physical pain, to nausea, to incontinence. When it comes to managing and even getting rid of these unwanted side effects, complementary and alternative medicine has much to offer, and it's now making its way into the major medical institutions as an option for patients. The next two healing solutions are proving themselves to be absolutely indispensable in that arena.
Well, it's interesting because just even a few years ago, doctors would say don't get any, they thought that getting a massage would actually spread the tumor. They actually said don't do massage for cancer patients. I believe their theory was that the tumor could spread into the blood, through the lymph, but they've actually seen that it's more beneficial for the cancer patient. It's so great, so beneficial for people that are undergoing chemoradiation. There's a lot of toxins within the body to try to kill the tumor in Western medicine. So massage therapy plays a really great role in addressing the filtration of those toxins in conjunction with drinking water and just helping to create the flow and in boosting the immune system through the lymphatic system. I believe massage therapy could be integrated during chemo and radiation. Typically, I've heard from my patients' doctors that they recommend it after they've undergone treatment. Typically, I would recommend acupuncture during treatment, and then once the rounds have been completed, then they can perform the massage therapy. And I believe the reasoning behind that is because of the exposure to the therapist as well as the patient. I believe that's why it's not typically recommended during treatment. So cupping is really great for cancer patients. The thing you have to caution with cupping, though, is cancer patients can be very sensitive, especially when they're undergoing chemo and radiation. The person that's performing the cupping needs to be very educated in it. They need to be aware of the signs and the sensitivity of the patient. So if a cancer patient were to do cupping, it should be very light suction, more focusing on the lymph. But because cupping is really great for circulating the lymph, it would be recommended for cancer patients. The modality that I probably would recommend the most for a cancer patient in Chinese medicine is moxa, because moxa is a type of herb that gets burned on top of the skin with a barrier. It's an infrared heat. They have done studies on it where it, again, helps to increase the white blood cell count. It can be used for the nausea, vomiting that's happening during the treatment in conjunction with Western medicine, So, both cupping, moxa, acupuncture, really great Chinese medicine modalities for helping a cancer patient undergo Western therapy treatments. Also really great for neuropathy that occurs. Cupping can help with that as well. I treat a lot of cancer patients. Most of it is emotional based.
For cancer patients who are lucky enough to live near one of the major cancer centers, like Sloan Kettering, Yale, or Dana-Farber, to name a few, you'll find that some of the complementary therapies already mentioned in this episode are often supported and sometimes even administered on location. This next healing modality is another one of those that simply had too much research showing its effectiveness for modern medicine to ignore. I'm talking about acupuncture, and when it comes to a cancer treatment protocol, this one is a powerhouse.
One of the areas that acupuncture has actually been used within the hospital setting in the United States and other countries around the world is in the oncology setting. So for supporting patients who have cancer and are going through cancer treatment.
Working with someone who's managing cancer, acupuncture is phenomenal for its benefits to de-stress the body and help calm the mind, which is a huge part of someone's journey with cancer. And then I think that relating to fatigue, so chemotherapy and radiation create a lot of fatigue. And so having acupuncture treatments while going through treatment can help the body manage the treatment. The body likes to feel that calmness, and especially when they're going through something big, like a chemotherapy round, the acupuncture just helps generally stabilize the system so that the system can actually manage the chemotherapy.
And there's been some really phenomenal research there. So some of the challenges that people have might be hot flashes as a result of certain types of treatment, have issues with sleep, have issues with depression or anxiety. And there's actually a lot of really good evidence around all of those areas. And what's wonderful is that sometimes, because of these side effects, patients aren't able to finish their treatments, but when they're able to get that support through acupuncture, it means that they're well enough that they're able to continue and to get their treatment, which is really helpful.
And I know in China they've done a lot of these clinical studies like I talked about earlier. They're not double-blind random controlled studies. They're basically, we took 40 patients who were having chemotherapy for, let's say, bowel cancer. There's any number of studies out there that we can look at, and they'll tell you what points they used and how many times a week they were treated. And then they do the usual breakdown, 10% didn't feel anything, 30% felt moderate relief, et cetera, et cetera. So there's plenty of studies out there on that from both Taiwan and mainland China.
One area of support for patients who are going through chemo is that many of them will get nausea and vomiting, which is really challenging and unpleasant. And acupuncture has a really wonderful evidence base for just helping to prevent those symptoms and really to keep those from being as problematic. The biggest drive for including acupuncture in integrative oncology is that the patients were going elsewhere for acupuncture anyways. So one patient, two patients, a handful of patients would go and really get amazing results by seeing an acupuncturist, and they would tell their friends or tell other people that they'd met there, and then this would get fed back to the doctors and to the care team. And so they wanted this treatment to be part of their package of care, and also that they saw that it was happening anyways. What we see is, if you look at all of the top oncology hospitals in the United States, nearly all of them have acupuncture offered on-site by a traditionally trained licensed acupuncturist.
I hope you're enjoying tonight's episode. We'll get right back into it in a second, but I wanted to take a quick moment to tell you how you can own the entire series. Below this video, you'll find a link to the full Proven docuseries, as well as a bunch of powerful bonuses that you can bring into your home at a special discounted price. This also includes a Proven companion guidebook that's jam-packed with powerful takeaways and action items from each episode. It's loaded with deep dive wisdom that isn't included in our free premiere. If you're interested in bringing these powerful Proven healing solutions into your life, it's well worth checking out. Plus, the proceeds from your purchase will help us on our quest to unveil new breakthrough medicines and share this information with the world. Make sure to check it out. Now, back to tonight's episode. Okay, so stacking the healing odds in your favor using the best of every school of medicine, ancient and new, seems to be the resounding approach we're hearing about from our experts. Now we're going to go back to our proven roots and dive into the herbal side of things. We'll be starting off this upcoming segment with one of the most powerful cancer treatments in the natural world, medicinal mushrooms, and then moving into some other herbs and nutritional approaches that are showing great results. But before we get into this next section, I want to remind you that the names of all the healing protocols, including the herbs and supplements in each of our episodes, are always listed on the screen at the end of each episode. Okay, are you ready?
So mushrooms and cancer have a clear link. It's hard for me to talk about it because I own a mushroom company, so I can't really comment that any particular mushroom heals any particular disease or ailment. And this is particularly emotionally difficult for me because my father had cancer, and he had 2 types of lymphoma in 7 parts of his body, and like 6 months later, he is now in the clear. And that's amazing. And I feel like because it's the second leading cause of death, I think it would be amazing if people would be willing to talk more freely and openly. Obviously, I understand why the government doesn't want somebody who has a brand and a commercial interest to talk about that. So I understand both sides, but it is undeniable that if you start looking at the research that is done with these medicinal and functional mushrooms, that there's something there. How relevant it is and how strong it is, that's where people take 2 sides. But culturally, it has been used for immune system for a long time. For example, one of my favorite mushrooms is the king of all mushrooms called chaga, C-H-A-G-A. Chaga is one of our most important, in Finland where I grew up, our most important superfoods. Same goes for our neighbors. So we're neighbored by Sweden and on the other side, Russia. And in Russia, a Nobel-winning author, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, wrote the book called Cancer Ward, literally about cancer. And in this book, he says that like this cancer patient would go in the forest to look for chaga to heal like animals do. They take something from the forest and they heal. So the cultural connection with mushrooms and cancer is also pretty relevant. And then if you start looking at the research and you go to PubMed and you start going through, and there's literally thousands of these studies for different types of cancer with different types of mushrooms, not just chaga and reishi, but also shiitake, maitake, and the list goes on. Acaricus blazei. What they do is they obviously help with the immune system. So what is cancer? Cancer is when your immune system is jeopardized and it's weak. So if you have these internal security officers like natural killer cells and cytokines and these things protecting your body, it's not like they don't get intruders every day. The reality is that we get attacked by these cancerous cells all the time, but our body is strong enough to fight it, right? But when your body immune system is jeopardized, then it doesn't have the power to protect the house, so to say. So let's assume that you go and take chemo or another conventional cancer therapy, your immune system gets wiped out even more. So the starting point is that your immune system is weak, and then the conventional therapy wants to clean out those cancer cells, and while doing it, it's going to make the immune system even weaker. So it would only make sense that during that time, you want to, obviously avoid all pathogens, so stay at home or in a common, safe environment, but also any way you can help rebuild that immune system. And that's where mushrooms might be pretty fascinating.
Chaga is really interesting because it contains betulin and betulinic acid, which have been shown to have some significant anti-tumor activity, both in laboratory studies, so in vitro, but also in vivo. And that's important because in vitro studies, test tube studies, often do not translate into efficacy in vivo. Now, of course, if it works in a mouse or a rat, that still doesn't mean it's going to work in a human, but the research is ongoing, and this is an area that I think is incredibly promising. There was one Russian study, and it was an epidemiological study, so there may be other factors that they didn't account for, but it was really interesting. In the areas of Russia where chaga consumption is high, and it's drank as a beverage, not just as a medicinal, the rates of a large number of cancers are significantly lower than in surrounding regions that have same socioeconomic status, same diet, same environmental factors. The only major difference that they could conclude, and of course there could be something they missed, was the chaga consumption. So this is, again, for me, is an area where I would love to see more research. There is research, but there's just not a lot of human data. That is something that really needs to be done.
My father is 71 years old, and he's a good old Finnish farmer. And although living off the land and eating a lot of beautiful things and heirloom things, he's a farmer, meat and potato kind of a guy, but active and gets a checkup every year cleanup. And then suddenly, kind of out of the blue, he had been stopping eating heavier foods in the evening and just had a salad for dinner at 6 p.m. and started losing a little bit of weight. He lost like 15, 20 pounds, and he got a little bump in his hip. And he thought it was like a hernia, which is, not that uncommon for an older gentleman. So he was like, oh, this little hernia go. And he goes to get a checkup, and they come to him, is like, it's not a hernia, it's some sort of a cancer cell. It's obvious, we're just not sure what type of cancer it is. So more studies are given. In Finland, luckily, healthcare is completely free, and there's great people helping out. Figure out that he has both Hodgkin's and non-Hodgkin's type of a lymphoma in 7 different parts of the body. So then he gets advice from the US experts at the Memorial Sloan Kettering, and then the Finnish experts, and they prescribe to him certain types of drugs, because he's already at stage 4 at this point. He's 71 years old, stage 4. The only thing he didn't have, it was not in the bone. It hadn't spread to the bones yet. He got it early enough. But this all apparently happened in less than a year. So from the last checkup to the next checkup, it was less than a year, and he was completely clean. And then suddenly the cancer is in many parts of the body. And that's not that unheard of. Like, cancer can spread really quickly, especially on an older person. So he goes on this protocol. Originally, doctors prescribed him this crazy program. So he got diagnosed in January. He starts the program in April, and in like October-ish, he's completely free of cancer. And all the things he did, I can't really go into specifically, but he had conventional therapy, and then he had some basic natural things to go with it. But something that is a stage 4 cancer, and let's call it 6 months, is another testament to how amazing our body is. Our body wants to heal. When given the right circumstances, it is a self-correcting, self-healing organism, and that's what we do. There's a limit to it, obviously. We can't live forever, but even at an older age, when given the right tools, our body is an amazing healer. The thing is that you just need to give it the right tools and the right environment, those hormetic stressors that then the body can take with the right rest and recovery and rebuild itself. And obviously, it needs to get checked. The odds and percentages of cancer coming back are pretty high, especially because he decided that he wanted also conventional therapy. But 6 months, you can do wonders if given the right tools.
So when we're talking about cancer and the use of herbs, most oncologists are very conservative, and I understand that mindset. And so you often hear them telling their patients not to take herbs. But the funny thing is they don't tell them not to eat garlic, not to eat ginger, not to eat blueberries, not to eat cinnamon, which also happen to be herbs. And these are things you may consume much greater quantities of than you would take as an herbal supplement or as a tincture. So the reality is, when we look at the data, and so this is about proof, right? So what's the data show? Well, the data shows that, in fact, many of the herbs used conjunctively, for instance, in traditional Chinese medicine with chemotherapy, not only don't interfere with chemotherapy, they enhance chemotherapy, like the Fuzheng remedies, which enhance chemotherapy, reduce side effects, and basically enhance immune competence in people taking them. Now, I do know of 2 substances that have been shown to interfere with chemotherapy. There may be others. I can't say that there are not, but there are 2 that I know that can. One is St. John's wort, which is sort of the poster child for herb-drug interactions. And then the other one is the green tea extract EGCG, which is a very highly concentrated extract. It's not green tea. And so those are the only 2 substances that I have seen reports where it has been shown that a herbal, or in this case, nutritional supplement of the EGCG actively had a negative effect on chemotherapy. So I think if somebody is working with a sort of complementary oncologist, they would probably be pretty aware of this information. If they are working with a more orthodox oncologist, you can go online to someplace like PubMed, which is the sort of national database of research, and find these studies and actually, take them to your doctor, showing, again, that there is very little evidence of these things, with these 2 exceptions, having a negative effect, and actually a significant amount of research showing that they have positive effects.
All cancers impact how cells produce energy. There's a lot of research that's been done in what's called the Warburg effect. What I like to explain to my patients is this. How your cells use fuel is impacted by the fuel that's abundant and there for you. We're Americans. We woke up every day of our lives to a refrigerator and a pantry full of food. We have more fuel than we know what to do with and that we can expend. And the fuel that our bodies and our cells are adapted to using through evolutionary pressures, we can just break them down into 2. There are more, but let's just break them down into sugar, right? Blood sugar or glucose, and ketones, which is a final breakdown product of fat, either dietary fat or body fat. Well, 99% of the time, you have glucose available. So that's what we do. We use glucose because we're stimulated to make ketones in an emergency if we're fasting. If it's, 20,000 years ago, it's February, I live in New Hampshire, there's not a lot to eat until I catch that deer that goes by, right? I take that deer out, I feast on that deer as long as I can, and then I might go 2 weeks without eating food until I catch the next one. So then the question is, what happens during those 2 weeks? Do I starve to death? Am I miserable? Do I sit there, lethargic and saying, oh my goodness, I'm going to starve to death. I have no energy. I have a low blood sugar migraine. I'm going to die. It's winter. And then I magically get lucky enough to kill another deer? Our species would have never survived if that was the case. Instead, what happens is the body turns to a different mechanism. We have a hybrid engine, the jet fuel, the rocket fuel, the glucose. We ran out of that, and now we can switch to diesel, right? It's not as powerful, but it can give us a lot of gas mileage. And that's called ketones. And we manufacture those ketones. And what happens when we make ketones in great numbers is we're not hungry. We have more energy. We're actually stronger. We have clearer thinking. Why is that the case? Well, it makes sense. If I've gone a week without eating food, I got to be more alert, faster, stronger, and smarter to catch that next deer. Ketosis is something that we've always known about in the context of a brain disorder called epilepsy. When we change the fuel the brain uses, we don't have seizures. But then we started to learn that ketosis benefits us in every way. It activates those longevity genes, the oncoprotective, the neuroprotective, and the cardioprotective genes are activated when we're fasting. So you can have a fast mimicking lifestyle to promote ketosis, or you can actually go ahead and practice fasting, which I do. I practice fasting. I'll do a 5-day fast periodically throughout the year. Typically during the winter months, I like to do a 5-day fast once a month from December through March. And then I kind of practice time-restricted eating the rest of the time. Going back to what happens in cancer and tumor cells, there's this effect where sugar that's being demanded by the cancer cell is burning without oxygen. Now, what that means is if the oxygen part of the cell, the engine of the cell, we call it the mitochondria, if that's damaged and the cell still wants to live, it can make energy without the engine. It can make energy without the mitochondria. So the mitochondria can fail and the sugar can be fed into the cell and it can inefficiently continue to make energy. So the cancer cell stays alive. That's not good. If we have a cancer cell and a normal cell together and we remove glucose, we remove sugar, what becomes available are ketones. Ketones cannot produce energy without a mitochondria. So the healthy cell gets its fuel and it keeps on going. The cancer cell is starved of its fuel and it dies. So ketosis can help some people with cancer contribute to their own health. By being in ketosis, they can starve their own cancer cells of the ability to make energy. So that's the basis of it. It's much more complex than that, but for the most part, it's something that's being done in virtually every type of cancer. It's often supported by oncologists. Anything you do that's different from the norm, you should probably have that conversation with your oncologist.
Today, someone gets pancreatic cancer, that's bad luck. Give me a freaking break. It's not bad luck. It's chemistry we don't understand. And now we're starting to understand it for the first time. So let's pick, for example, cancer, and let's pick a specific one, pancreatic cancer. So it's one of the deadliest cancers. And today, when someone gets it, it's considered bad luck. We have a deadly disease that's considered bad luck. That's the state of the art in science and technology. To me, that's unacceptable. Luckily, a group at New York University is making huge strides in demystifying this bad luck and lore, right? And so the group led by Dr. Miller and Cohen have discovered that actually it's not bad luck. It's actually caused by the gut microbiome. And so let's talk about the mechanism of that. Microbes that live in the small intestine, under certain circumstances, will travel up the bile duct and lodge themselves inside the pancreas. And when they get there, they say, wow, this is a great place. It's warm, there's unlimited food, I don't have to compete against other microbes, right? All I have to worry about is the immune system. This really pesky immune system keeps attacking me. But if I can produce chemical signals that tell the immune system, you know what, this is an immunoprotective area, you don't need to be here, like pull a Jedi trick. Now the immune system pulls back and says, all is good here, no need to react. That's one side of the story. The other side of the story is that in our body, cancer cells arise daily. In fact, many, many times a day, our cells become carcinogenic. But the immune system finds them, kills them, and they're gone. That's a natural progression of events every single day. So what happens is when the gut bacteria that are now living in the pancreas are able to turn off the immune system, now they allow these cancer cells to actually grow into tumors because the immune system is not able to kill them. And so that's the mechanism of how pancreatic cancer comes about. And this mechanism was proven in a mouse model. It was shown in a mouse model. The next questions that we're going to ask by studying humans and not mice is, are there specific bacteria or fungi that travel up the bile duct? Are there specific pathways that they're using to gain foothold through the bile duct? Are there specific weaknesses in the immune system that allow this event to happen? So we're going to study how can we prevent microbes from ever going up the bile duct. If we can do that, end of story. No one will ever get pancreatic cancer, or at least majority of the causes, right? If we cannot do that, okay, the bacteria, let's say, or fungi are now lodged inside the pancreas. What are the specific pathways that they're using in order to turn off the immune system? And can we prevent those pathways from being expressed so that that doesn't happen, right? So there are a couple of places there where we can intervene to actually prevent pancreatic cancer. There will be other random mutations caused by maybe chemicals that we introduce environmentally. There will be some genetic predisposition. So there's a variety of causes, but I firmly believe that majority of pancreatic cancer cases are due to the microbiome activity. I believe that.
So we've covered a lot of territory in this episode, but although the techniques may all be slightly different, there are core principles and terms that have come up again and again. One of these is immunity and its importance when it comes to fighting cancer cells and ultimately overcoming the disease. Remember how Ralph Moss spoke at length about the state of modern oncology in the beginning of this episode? It's no secret that they too are realizing the potential that immunotherapy holds. But what if there are alternative and often all-natural immunotherapy approaches that were not being offered? Well, something revolutionary is happening in Germany and surrounding regions right now that the world needs to know about. And this is where we're going in our number one modality.
My fundamental view these days about cancer treatment is that the most promising thing is immunotherapy. But my idea of immunotherapy is to incorporate immune checkpoint inhibitor drugs, the new drugs that have appeared since 2011, into a holistic program similar to what the German naturopathic doctors or the holistic, whatever you want to call them, integrative physicians have been doing for about 50 years. And so the basic German program would be hypothermia, heat therapy, plus mistletoe. If somebody asked me to encapsulate in a few words what is the German approach to cancer, it would be stimulate the immune system through heat therapy and mistletoe or maybe mushroom extracts. That would cover about 90% of the German clinics.
The literature on mistletoe is quite amazing. In much of Europe, mistletoe is a routine prescription drug given to people to reduce side effects from chemotherapy. But interesting new work suggests that mistletoe can cure some forms of cancer. We don't even understand how it works, but it's clearly working through the immune system. And we need to, obviously, the frontier in cancer treatment is not more poisons, because that's the old slash, burn, and poison approach in oncology. And we know it can work in some circumstances, but in many it leaves people disabled with neurological disease and a whole host of problems, so that you cure the cancer and you end up creating an invalid, or worse, you cure the cancer and kill the patient, which has been known to happen in far too many instances. The side effects, so to speak, of chemotherapy often includes death.
I counted at one time 135 clinics in Germany using whole body hypothermia for different conditions, but including cancer. So it's well known, well used. Mistletoe has been legal as a treatment for advanced breast cancer in Germany since 1963. Unknown in the United States. They never registered with the American oncologist that, a short plane trip away, you could go to another world. I mean, I was like, first time I went there to Baden-Baden, I was like a kid in a candy shop. I couldn't believe, the wide-scale acceptance of so many things that were fringe. All these things are kind of non-controversial over there. So that's where my mind, for many years, 20 years, has been focused more on the German, Austrian, Swiss approach. And within the world of chemotherapy, it's the difference between the American approach, which is the maximum tolerated dose. That's our standard. How much can you give to these people, and maybe even give them more than they can stand to see if you can cure them before you kill them, versus the minimum effective dose, which is more the European style of treatment. Now, I'm generalizing here, but I'm talking about the big component of German medicine that's pro-alternative, which is more than 50%. That's pro-alternative.
I was just at the Medicine Week in Baden-Baden. All of the leaders of integrative medicine, and some of them are oncologists that use low-dose chemotherapy with hyperthermia, so they heat your body to a core temperature of around 104. What happens to a cancer cell in hyperthermia is it becomes sensitized in its membranes to chemotherapy, so it actually absorbs more chemotherapy than every other method of administering chemotherapy.
There are methods embedded in the complementary approach, especially of the German doctors, that sync incredibly well with the immune checkpoint inhibitors. These work best on so-called hot tumors, but there are ways to increase the effectiveness of this kind of treatment by turning a cold tumor into a hot tumor. Applying some of the methods of German complementary oncology simultaneously with giving the immune checkpoint inhibitor. So it's often said that the immune checkpoint inhibitor releases the brake on the immune system. This is basically true. But you also have to step on the gas. It isn't enough just to release the brake. And Jim Allison and Jed Wolchuk at Memorial Sloan Kettering, too much to their credit, have pointed out one of these, and that's Newcastle disease virus vaccine. Newcastle virus vaccine has a selective effect on cancer cells because it embeds itself, like viruses embed themselves into cancer cells and pop out on the surface of the cell. This has been proven. It makes that cell much more visible to the immune system. So if you highlight the abnormality of the cancer cell simultaneously by breaking the link between the cancer cell and the immune cell, you've got a winning combination. And they pointed this out 5 years ago. It hasn't been implemented in conventional circles. It's much discussed in alternative circles in Germany, and nobody has yet formed a program around that. But there are people in Austria, mainly Ralph Kleef at the Kleef Clinic, that are doing something somewhat similar. He uses another immune stimulant called interleukin-2, developed at the National Cancer Institute, legal as a treatment for various kinds of cancer, both in the U.S. and in Austria. And he uses that along with some other things to minimize the toxicity of that treatment. And he uses hyperthermia. They're synergizing treatments. They're giving lower doses of different things that synergize together and then create an effect equal to or similar to that achieved with high doses. And there are ways of making that traditional German program much more effective by adding in low doses of the immune checkpoint drugs, and simultaneously you make the immune checkpoint drugs much more effective and applicable at much lower doses, so you greatly reduce the side effect profile of these otherwise very dangerous drugs. And this is a match made in heaven. Unfortunately, the drug industry has absolutely no interest in this whatsoever, and the reason is they sell most drugs, and especially the immune checkpoint drugs, by the milligram.
They've been injecting viruses into cancer patients like cold viruses, and a few other viruses for the last 20 years. Dr. Kubler in Munich, he's been injecting a virus like a cold virus. What does it do to the immune system? It provokes the immune system. Well, that's what you want to do in a cancer patient. Well, we're just starting to do that here. So originally, when these doctors came here, and I brought some of them over into the States, and they lectured on this, for some reason I was harassed by the state for having done that. So I don't know whether that was connected or not, but that's what happened. Now, our Western medicine, even at UC San Francisco, and you can read papers now that have shown injecting certain viruses into cancer patients and certain types of cancer works.
Based on studies at MD Anderson, you can probably reduce the amount of these drugs being given by at least 2/3. So they have every reason in the world to push for high dose, what I would consider high dose, in other words, maximum tolerated dose. Instead of doing a few other things alongside these drugs, give them at a low dose, like 1/3, and I think you could probably go far lower than that, but Ralph Kleef uses about a 1/3 dose because there go 2/3 of their profit. And we're talking about $8 billion for Keytruda last year. 8.8, I think, was the figure for 2018. And just think, instead of let's say a $9 billion drug, you now have a $3 billion drug. Well, I think $3 billion is pretty good. The company would not go broke getting $3 billion, but it happens to be $6 billion less than they are anticipating. So there's every reason in the world for them to resist this. But I think when the word gets out about this, if the word gets out about this, people are going to demand it, and people are going to start to give this more widely. But it isn't easy to break through basically the wall of silence about these kind of developments. It's very much against the wishes of the drug industry, and people have no idea to what degree the drug industry controls the oncology profession.
Wow, we covered a lot in this episode. Let's recap. First off, unfortunately, there is a cancer industry. Billions of dollars are made on this disease each year. Entrepreneurial oncology refers to the fact that many researchers are getting funded by big pharma, and they get payouts for blockbuster drugs, so scientists are incentivized to design more of them. Okay, moving on to our healing solutions. First up, the importance of mindset cannot be understated. We went into many modalities that enhance states of well-being. To start, yoga cancer care research is focused on everything around the treatment of cancer, and it's been shown to reduce depression, anxiety, and mood disturbances, to increase sleep, appetite, and also life purpose. These are things that are absolutely vital when it comes to working through cancer. Basically, yoga helps you live better when going through the rigors of chemo or radiation therapy. Hypnotherapy is also a wonderful way of alleviating anxiety, depression, pessimism, and negative thoughts around treatment. Never mind the fact that it also has an incredible effect on pain. Dr. Carol Janandis, hypnosis researcher, told us that it can actually tackle both mind and body symptoms. This practice lets you tap into your inner resources, bringing about a parasympathetic or rest, digest, and heal state. Hypnosis also helps with end-of-life concerns and transitions, allowing one to be pain-free and emotionally strong as they approach the journey beyond. Next up, manual therapies include so many ways to therapeutically use touch to help heal and soothe. Once stigmatized because they were thought to spread tumors in the body, science now shows this to be untrue, and now many doctors agree that massage is wonderful in cancer care. Next, integrative oncology is an exciting field that focuses on patient-centered care. Instead of following a belief system, even in the face of contradictory evidence, this opens up the discussion to all available tools, including standard care and complementary and alternative medicine. Next up, acupuncture is one of the most well-recognized and well-studied integrative medicine modalities out there. The science is clear. When you combine acupuncture with your chemotherapy and/or radiotherapy protocol, the side effects are reduced and the primary therapy is strengthened. So basically, it makes standard care more potent and safer. It can also take care of the symptoms that often come along with treatment: hot flashes, insomnia, anxiety, pain, and nausea. CINV, or chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting, is a major concern. And guess what's a remarkable therapy for this? Yup, acupuncture. Large institutions began studying acupuncture for oncology care because patients were getting treatment, having amazing results, and were sharing those success stories with other patients who then went on and got their own profound results. Eventually, the medical authorities decided they needed to investigate what was going on. Now they've embraced this therapy. At least the forward-thinking organizations do. Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center essentially sets the guidelines for integrative oncology. And who heads this department? Well, MDs who are fully trained in traditional Chinese medicine. We then moved on to herbal medicine featuring functional mushrooms. Tero from Four Sigmatic talked to us about chaga, a fungus that grows all over the world. Researchers in Russia and Sweden discovered that chaga mushrooms are a boon to your immune system, upping levels of natural killer cells, which help to clear out cancer cells. Chaga also contains high levels of betulinic acid, which has known anti-tumor properties. Tero then shared how functional mushrooms helped his father become cancer-free. Now, when it comes to cancer treatment, there's a lot of misconception around herbal medicine. On one hand, an oncologist may caution against using herbs, but on the other, they may be totally fine with their patients eating garlic, ginger, onion, turmeric, all of which are herbs. Remember, in herbal medicine, there is no distinction between food and medicine. Next, we learned that Chinese herbs have been well studied when it comes to cancer, and all roads point to this one fact. Not only do certain herbs not interfere with the chemo, they actually enhance the chemotherapy, making it work better, and they also reduce its side effects, which are many. Fasting seems to activate longevity genes, which are known to be oncoprotective, neuroprotective, and cardioprotective, meaning fasting can protect you from getting cancer and protect your brain and heart too via a process called ketosis, which literally starves cancer cells. Next, Dr. Momo shared research revealing that pancreatic cancer, a very deadly form, can be caused by imbalance in the gut flora. Dysbiosis in our microbiome can lead not only to cancer, but a number of other diseases. We then moved on to our number one modality, naturopathic oncology and the German approach to cancer care. In this part of the world, they take integrative oncology not just to the next level, but to levels far beyond, combining thermo and immunotherapy. Clinicians there use something called hyperthermia. The opposite of hypothermia, this heat therapy actually stimulates the immune system and allows chemotherapy to be more effective. Not stopping there, the use of intravenous mistletoe, which has been part of routine therapy in Europe since the 1960s, is definitely part of the German approach to cancer care. Again, this herb reduces the side effects and increases the potency of chemotherapy. They also use leading-edge medications, such as immune checkpoint inhibitor drugs. These keep the immune system working at its peak, while most conventional chemotherapies literally compromise or disturb your natural immunity entirely. Next up, viruses are now being used to treat cancer, and even the National Cancer Institute has written extensively on the science of the Newcastle virus for cancer treatment. The virus essentially highlights the cancer cell, making it an easier target for our immune cells to see. Okay, 2 more things before we go. 1, make sure to click the button below this video to find out how you can bring all 9 episodes of our Proven docuseries, plus a bunch of powerful bonus resources into your home for life. Every one of us deserves to know the full spectrum of healing options that are out there. And the information in this series is something you will want to come back to again and again whenever an illness arises in your circle, be it your own health or that of your family and friends. You can own the digital, the physical, or the all-access package at a special discounted price, but only during this event. Now is the time. Lastly, what proven healing secrets do we have coming up next? For our final episode 9 tomorrow, we're going to be talking about something that is intimately important to all of us: sexual health, hormone health, and fertility. We were blown away by the depth of knowledge that our experts shared with us on these 3 topics. I promise you, this is the finale to our series for a reason. And not to worry, the subject matter is completely appropriate and can be viewed in the workplace. Trust me, this is not one to miss. See you tomorrow.